Hello everyone, this is Larry Myers. I'm here to talk to you about the case study of the missing Booster Club funds. This case involves a middle school, I believe in an urban setting, has a declining student population. A lot of the families have decreasing socioeconomic status, and the more prosperous families are moving to the suburbs. Mr. Stevens is the focus administrator. Has an issue following a basketball game with allegedly missing money from the gate bag. The problem identification analysis. Mr. Stevens has to use parent volunteers at a lot of school activities because he doesn't have an assistant principal, has not a lot of staff to support the school activities. So he has a lot of parent volunteers who are active in the school in a lot of different ways, and school activities are one of the things that he does. Mrs. Bowman is one of the parents that has been working and had kids at the school for a long time. She's working at the game that night, but she's disgruntled because she's had a conversation with Mr. Stevens about funding for a school trip for her daughter Lucy. Mr. Dumas is a local community member. He works at the local mill, and he says that when he came to the game that night, he gave the gatekeeper a $50 bill in return for his admission to the game. After the game, there wasn't a $50 bill in the gate bag. Mrs. Bowman left a note in the gate bag that said that there were 10 tickets that were torn that were not used. The 10 tickets were not available after the game. The total in the bag matches the receipt for the number of tickets that were actually sold, but Mr. Stevens is concerned that there's not any money or torn tickets left that would have accounted for the $50 bill. What I'm trying to find out, or what I need to know, is who was the other parent working at the gate with Mrs. Bowman? Did Mr. Dumas actually pay with a $50 bill? When he came in, he had just gotten paid through the payroll at his bank or office, and he had large denominations of cash, and he said he used a $50 bill to pay. Were there actually tickets that were torn, and what happened to the tickets? Is there money actually missing? How much money was in the bag before the game? We've talked about change funds before, and so I'd want to know how much money was actually in the bag before the game started compared to how much was left over. Has Mrs. Bowman been accused of problems in the past with mishandling funds? She's worked at many games. She's had kids go through the school before. So are there going to be any problems that you can look at as a history for her in the past? And the problem I identified is that did Mrs. Bowman or someone else take money from the gate funds? The proposed plan of action that I look at is that I'm going to question the person that was supposed to be working with Mrs. Bowman at the gate. Ask them about torn tickets. Did they receive a $50 bill from Mr. Dumas? Hopefully locate the missing tickets if possible. I'm going to go back and recount the money to make sure that find out how much was in the money or in the bag at the start of the game compared to how much was there afterwards. Discuss the situation with anybody that had any contact with the bag prior to the game. Possibly the bookkeeper. Did you use the change fund to establish the start of the bag for the gate and the concessions? I'd also want to talk to Mr. Dumas again to find out if he actually did use a $50 bill. He mentioned it to Mr. Stevens as he walked in, but did Mr. Stevens actually witness him putting the $50 bill or using the $50 bill to pay his entrance into the game? If there's no doubt that there's $50 missing, then I would probably need to call Mrs. Bowman in, and I probably would have a member of the staff or a district administrator in attendance as well. Explain the situation to her, tell her what's going on, try to make it as clear as possible, and then maybe there's a good explanation for what happened. I also would contact the district account manager if there were any improper mishandling of funds. May I want to contact the superintendent if anything comes up from our discussions. Next, to resolve the issues based on promoting success of all students, I'd want to make sure that we maintain this investigation as discreetly as possible. It shouldn't be, publicized. It shouldn't be let out to the public that anything had gone wrong or that Mrs. Bowman had done anything wrong until we'd actually found out for sure. We need to work with the district administrator to make sure the investigation, there's actual evidence and there's actually a case here that needs to be looked at. Mr. Stevens says there's $50 missing, but there'll only be funds missing if the ticket's torn or actually paid for and the tickets can't be found. After he looks in the bag, he says there's $50 missing, but the tickets are also missing. So if there's not an accountability for where the tickets are and there's not accountability for the money missing, then as long as you could find the tickets, you should be okay as far as locating and what happened to the tickets. Mr. Stevens should have advised Mrs. Bowman to check with the PTA about her daughter's trip. He's not necessarily the sole administrator of the PTA funds. Maybe she could go to the PTA directly or PTA president or directors and see if she could get the funds for her daughter's trip for herself. Maybe they would have a different view than Mr. Stevens would have. The principal's responsible for making sure the proper handling of funds occurs. Mr. Stevens has some policies like pre-numbered tickets. He also counts the inventory for the concessions. But the way that the staffing is handled and lack of staffing and lack of assistant principal means that there could be issues that come up. He needs to make sure that he tries to handle that in a different way or get some staff that maybe are paid to help at the school activities. And then, I said before, the district needs to make sure the case is handled as discreetly as possible so that Mrs. Bowman's rights and reputation are not damaged in the process. There were two people that were supposed to be at the gate taking money for the tickets, so make sure and question and not make accusations to just the one person. In Category 4, it talks about debriefing the problem by reflecting on what you're thinking, feeling, and valuing. Well, when I first started looking at this, I immediately looked at the socioeconomic status. A lot of the parents have declining, the student population is going down there. There's parent socioeconomic status is going down. So immediately the idea is that someone probably took the money to help, like Mrs. Bowman maybe took money to help pay for her daughter's trip. After reading through the case study a couple more times, it became apparent that Mr. Stevens has a lot of things going on, especially during the game. He was at the door. There weren't a lot of other staff available to help. And so there could be some problems that arise because of lack of people that are there to help as far as the staff goes. And then also maybe he needed to have a few more procedures in place to help with any improprieties that might come up with the handling of the gate and the concessions. When Mr. Stevens went to the game and he saw Mrs. Bowman, his previous encounter with her had been at with the meeting when she was asking for the funds for Lucy. So possibly he had put the blame on her immediately because he was thinking negatively after the meeting with Mrs. Bowman. What I value is that our school has policies and staff in place so that we don't have situations like this occur. The bookkeeper takes the money directly to the staff person or the people that are managing the concessions and the gate, and then the money is directly handed back to the bookkeeper so that they can the money can be counted and put in a safe place, and it's managed more by the staff than it is by parents. We don't have parents that take money for our school. And then there are several unresolved issues, and some of these I've already pointed out already. But what happened to the torn tickets? Did Mr. Dumas actually pay with a $50 bill, and how much money, if any, is actually missing? Have there been problems with Mrs. Bowman in the past? And can the school maybe help Lucy pay for her trip to New York? Maybe there's another avenue that they can explore to see if maybe the trip and other students like her could be helped. Category 5, this part has 3 components, and the first one is promoting effective and efficient management of the school or district. a principal needs to welcome the use of parent volunteers. Mr. Stevens uses parents at the school activities due to the lack of staff support. So he doesn't have an assistant principal. It doesn't sound like he gets a lot of parent or staff volunteers from the school. So he uses parents, and parents like to be involved in the school activities. A school principal creates and implements policies and guidelines to help manage school funds. Mr. Stevens uses pre-numbered tickets and inventories of concession items. There probably should be more things in place, like maybe having the bookkeeper be in charge of getting the money to the parents, and maybe picking up the money following the game. If that's not possible, maybe they could do as another staff member or manage it in a different way. And then he works with the PTA to provide support for all the students. He's a steward for the students, for all students, and ensures that every student has the opportunity for success, and doesn't just allow, and even though he may not be the sole decision maker for the PTA, but he did decide in the best interest of all students that an individual student wouldn't be provided for. Promotes social learning of every student. School leader develops things like basketball games, and those are already part of the school anyway in district activities, but the school leader develops those and provides connections with the other schools and communities, and allows the community to be a part of the school through school activities, whether it's basketball games, football games, soccer, tennis, school nights, that they have book sales and things like that. The principal promotes those things by advocating connections through the school and community. Also, partnerships with local businesses. Having a relationship with people like Mr. Dumas, who works at the mill, helps to ensure and build relationships with the community. And then the school leader should have open two-way communication between families and the school. Having parents come in to participate in the Reading Buddies program. There's other things that the parents do. They collect and count proceeds, PTA fundraisers. There's lots of different things that he has connections to the community with and local stakeholders. So school and community is a big connection and promotes the social learning for every student. Finally, component 3 is promote student academic learning. We've already mentioned that Mr. Stevens, and as a principal, and I'm sure as a school district, has PTA members that come in after school and volunteer, and they also help with the reading program. The school leader works with the community and builds relationships with key stakeholders. We mentioned Mr. Dumas. He must also have some connections with other business leaders because Mr. Stevens has a good relationship with the PTA and the Booster Club leadership. And then finally, the principal advocates on behalf of the school to build and promote partnerships with the community. Mr. Stevens greets parents and community members at the door. When Mr. Dumas came in, he greeted him with a hospitable hello, and also, communicated with him about how they need to use the funds, no matter what the denomination was. So, having a good relationship with the community promotes student academic learning. Resources are available, trips, field trips, all kinds of things are available for school and the community when the students are involved in the process. And involving key stakeholders and businesses really promotes the academic learning for all students. I believe this is the last slide, so thank you for viewing this, and I hope you got to learn a little bit about this case study. Thank you.